With a reported 10 to 15-day deadline, B-2 bombers in the background, and warnings that bad things happen if Tehran refuses U.S. demands, the White House is signaling diplomacy backed by real military force. Plus, Tucker Carlson just clashed head-on with U.S. Ambassador Mike Huckabee in an interview that's sending shockwaves through the American right. Jerusalem Minute starts now. Welcome back to Jerusalem Minute here on JNS TV. My name is Josh Haston, correspondent for JNS News, here in the JNS Media Hub alongside CEO of JNS, Alex Trayman. Alex, we are going to turn now to the Tucker Carlson interview with Ambassador Mike Huckabee. We could probably do a whole show breaking this down. It was a 2.5-hour video, including Carlson's 30-minute rant, I believe, at the beginning. And it all started when Carlson arrived in Israel on a private plane, landed at Ben Gurion Airport. From what I understand, I did not want to leave the airport to go anywhere in Israel. And then Carlson making up a story that he was detained by Israeli security personnel, which everyone here, including the ambassador, adamantly claimed that was false. It was completely fake news. He was lying about that. And we can really break this down. There's so much here to target. We could start here with our friend Eitan Fishberger on Twitter, who really great job of breaking it down. And the first thing is the fact that Carlson in the interview with the ambassador basically said that Ashkenazi Jews are not part of the Jewish people, that we have no rights to the land of Israel. We're not the real Jews. And I guess, Alex, we can take it from there. There's really a lot to break down.
I mean, honestly, I had to watch this for work, right? And for this podcast. I mean, this was like a 2.5-hour waste, of my time, of everybody's time. I wish I didn't have to watch, this guy. And he kept saying over and over again, I'm being accused of being an anti-Semite. I'm being accused of being a Nazi. Anybody that thought you were an anti-Semite before watching this video, they haven't like changed their tune and said, oh, maybe he isn't really an anti-Semite. I think everybody that thought that Tucker was an anti-Semite before has only doubled down their views that Tucker Carlson is an anti-Semite. And the reason why you say that is because of the things that he said in the interview. And first it starts with the rant. And how did he preface his rant? He prefaced his rant by saying, usually what you do is you do an interview and you let the interview stand on its own, and you don't tell the backstory of the interview before you show the interview. But in this case, I'm going to frame the entirety of the interview for you, and I'm going to go on a huge rant about how terrible my experience was, okay? And he talked about how Israel is the most violent country on earth,
Right.
okay? And because he said that the highest percentage of the civilians that have touched guns, because we have a civilian army that had to be called up. He said that Israel has a 7-front war against all of its enemies. So Israel's the problem, right?
This is probably the most violent country in the world, Israel. Is there a country in the world where a higher percentage of the population has held a gun or shot someone? I mean, I don't know the answer, but this is a country famously waging a 7-front war with all of its neighbors, so this is also the country that bombed the USS Liberty, knowing, we know this from NSA intercepts, that it was an American ship.
Because Iran has developed the strategy of terror proxies, including the Houthis and Hezbollah and Hamas, and because Syria, they've destabilized Iraq and Syria and everything against us, okay? And Israel has a 7-front war. It's because Israel launched a war against 7 of its neighbors. So Israel's the most violent country on earth, right? And then after that, you see all of the canards that, what right do the Jews have to be in the land? How do we know that these are Jews? He went over and over again about Netanyahu and his parents and his grandparents saying, they're from Poland. What proof do you have that they have any ancestral right to this land?
What you're saying is that certain people have a title to a highly contested region. They own it in some deep sense. So I think it's fair to ask, who are they and how do we know? So the current prime minister's ancestors weren't from here within recorded history. He has no deed. Bibi Netanyahu, on one side, his family's from Poland. They're from Eastern Europe. So how do we know that he has a connection to the people who God promised the land to, Abram's descendants? How do we know that?
Then he went on another tangent over and over again. Do the Irish have the right to be in Ireland and Northern Ireland? And do the British have a right to be in Britain? And how Stonehenge is older than any temple? And why are we talking about the Jewish rights to live in Israel? the reason why we're talking about Jewish rights to live in Israel, and we're talking about Christian Zionists and what does it mean to be Zionist, and I think Huckabee, he defined it well. He said Zionism is that you believe in the Jewish people's right to live in the Holy Land. He said, well, why are we talking about that right when we don't talk about the rights of any others? And I wish that Huckabee would have said, well, the reason why we talk about it is because, the United Nations in 1975, they came out with a resolution that said that Zionism is racism, right? So for decades, people have been trying to deny the whole concept of Zionism, saying that it's illegitimate and it's illegitimate for the Jewish people to live in the land. And, this Tucker was all over the place with every canard. He wanted to know, like, what is the definition of the greater Israel? He said, where's the borders of that? Where's the borders of Judea and Samaria? But then every time that Huckabee tried to double down and say, the borders that we're talking about are the actual borders of the state, then Tucker would say, well, why are we only talking about those borders? Why can't we be talking about bigger borders? The whole thing was absurd. It was
He's just
like
trying to bait him time and time again. He's trying
they're
to
just
bait
like
Huckabee.
rhetorical device after
Yeah.
rhetorical device. I thought that the best part about it came out when Tucker said, maybe I'm just being a little bit of a jerk about it, as he kept doubling down, and Huckabee said, yeah, you know what? You have been being a jerk.
I mean, we could break it down, again, for such a long time, but I mean, he basically said that he was okay with Iran having a nuclear weapon. It was like something he supported. And on the other hand,
Well, what he said is, that Israel shouldn't have nuclear.
Israel
He's
shouldn't
like,
have-
I don't think.
yeah.
He's like, I don't think anybody should have nuclear weapons. He's like, I'm a Christian. He kept saying, I'm a Christian. I'm a Christian. I don't believe in killing children. I don't believe in wars. I don't believe in killing anybody.
but he has advocated for Iran getting a nuclear bomb.
Of course, he's, Catholics, okay, have, they have been at the heart, and behind, the killing of more Jews and many wars, than almost any other peoples, right? So he didn't call them out, and he didn't say, well, maybe you Jews are a little bit sensitive because, us Christians have killed so many people over the years. That certainly wasn't going to happen. But he said that, Israel shouldn't have nuclear weapons either. He said it's a big problem.
He also tried to bait Huckabee in regard to the situation in Gaza, using, time and time again, talking about, look how many kids have been killed, look how many kids, saying this 14-year-old kid in Gaza was killed. There was one report where it was actually a fake news in terms of a kid who apparently was killed by the IDF. Turns out he was alive and well, according to Huckabee. But, if a 14-year-old or a 40-year-old or an 80-year-old with a gun is coming towards you, any reasonable person would eliminate that threat. But apparently, according to Tucker Carlson, if a Jew is threatened, or an IDF soldier, or whoever it is, then they do not have the right to self-defense. He doesn't want the Jews to live. That's really what it is.
Yeah, I mean, this is so important. He tried to grill, Huckabee on the numbers. How many children have you killed? And then when Huckabee was forced to use the only numbers that we have to rely on, which is the Gaza Health Ministry, and the Gaza Health Ministry is Hamas, as Huckabee said, and the Gaza Health Ministry, inflates the number of people killed, right? They don't have any interest whatsoever in decreasing the number of killed, and then saying that Israel had done more to reduce civilian casualties than any other army in the history of warfare. Tucker said, well, how do you prove that? Do you have the numbers? How many people have been killed in other places? And when Huckabee said that Israel does more to reduce civilian casualties than even the United States, then Carlson turned it on Huckabee and said, are you attacking the military of the United States, that they don't do a good job? And Huckabee saying, no, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying, like, whatever you would expect Israel to do, Israel does more than what you'd expect. How do you prove it? How do you? Like, everything was just like an attack from another side, just like some kind of a boxer. Like, go with the uppercut, go with the jab, come with the left, come with the right. I don't know why Huckabee did this, honestly.
Yeah.
I think it was, in a way, it's very much beneath him to sit with a Tucker Carlson. But you see, how great a sense of responsibility. I think, if you look at Huckabee, he's such an honorable man, and people have said, and we don't know if this is, I can't really verify this, but what I've been told, off the record on a background, was that, Huckabee, before the 12-day war, he sent a note to the president where he said, maybe it is that God spared your life that day at the campaign rally, just for a moment such as this, to be able to make sure that Iran doesn't cross the nuclear threshold and pose an existential threat to Israel. And if you take that mentality, right, I think that Huckabee thought, maybe I was appointed the ambassador to Israel for a moment such as this. So, when you have this very strong media pundit in America, putting all sorts of canards, against the state of Israel, against the Jewish people, and most importantly, I think, against the U.S.-Israel relationship, because ultimately that's what Tucker's upset about. He's upset, and he said it over and over again, that he feels that the United States is acting in Israel's interest before its own American interest. And so Huckabee, representing the U.S. government to Israel, felt it's his responsibility. This is the reason why he was appointed ambassador, to stand up to this. And he did, and I think he did a great job. Would I give him 100% on every issue? No, I thought there was a certain places where he could have done better, like when Tucker kept talking about Greater Israel. Huckabee could have come back and said, well, actually, that the British mandate to create a Jewish state in the area that was called Greater Palestine included all of Israel and all of Jordan.
Yes.
Okay, but the international community, first of all, the Brits cut off 75% of that territory and created a Hashemite kingdom in Jordan, even though the majority of the population in Jordan is Palestinian. Nobody talks about that. And then the British wanted to further divide the land and partition it into these non-contiguous Jewish Arab enclaves inside what was the remaining portion of Israel. And Israel said, okay, like, we'll take anything, right? And the only reason why it got bigger was because Israel was attacked by its neighbors, by its enemies, and then Israel wound up taking that land in defensive wars. And Israel has never gone on the offensive to take more land. And so even though we talk about what is a greater Israel, we see the opposite, that everybody's trying to shrink Israel. And he wanted to know what Netanyahu meant and what Huckabee meant when we talk about a greater Israel, or what Netanyahu meant when he invoked Amalek, which is basically saying that there is a genocidal enemy that wants to attack the state of Israel for no reason. And when that happens, that you have to finish them off, right? And so when Huckabee said, well, there's no policy that Israel has demonstrated that indicates that they want to kill every last Gazan, men, women, and children, and cattle. And so Tucker kept doubling down and saying again, well, what did he mean? What did he mean? And Huckabee said, well, I don't think it matters. But then when Huckabee challenged Tucker on the claims of people that say from the river to the sea, that's a genocidal claim. That means that every inch of land from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea should be free of Jews. Tucker says, well, you don't know what's in their hearts.
Yeah,
right?
Of course.
So,
Hypocrisy.
the whole thing was just like a complete 2.5 hour, vomit of hypocrisy and rhetorical devices and high school debating. I felt sorry for Huckabee, to be honest, that he just had to sit there and to take those punches. But you know what? We've all been taking these punches, and it's not just Tucker. It's Tucker. It's everybody that he's platformed. It's Piers Morgan. But I think that I think it would be good to just read here.
Yeah.
Huckabee did come out with a whole bunch of tweets to sort of defend what happened there.
Yeah.
I don't know if you want to read.
Sure, no, some of them here.
I think this one is the most important.
Here we go. When I sat down with Tucker Carlson Wednesday, I was expecting a thoughtful conversation and that he would ask questions and give me the opportunity to actually respond, just like he did with the little Nazi sympathizer Nick Fuentes, or the guy who thought Hitler was the good guy and Churchill the bad guy. What I wasn't anticipating was a lengthy series of questions where he seemed to be insinuating that the Jews of today aren't really the same people as the Jews of the Bible.
Yeah.
I mean,
and he finishes that tweet saying, I sincerely hope Tucker will let me know when he actually wants to learn facts about the land and people.
He knows the facts. He's not an idiot, but he just hates the Jews.
Yeah. Asking me about conspiracy theories should remain on the fringes and not be the heart of the conversation.
Wants to explore the genetics and whatnot. And Huckabee said, from what we know, genetics enrich volumes of written literature that the Jews of today can trace their lineage back thousands of years to the Israel and the Jewish people of the Bible. The haters here, and I'm sure Carlson would concur, they always tell us, go back to Poland, go back to Poland. When 6 million Jews are murdered in that part of the world, You know, they say, get out of here, get out of here, go back to your homeland, go back to Israel. We don't want you in Europe. And then we come here, and then they say, go back to Poland. I mean, these are the same
In the very
anti-Semites.
beginning of the Holocaust, okay, before the final solution of Hitler, you know, Hitler was going around saying that these are a peoples without a land. Okay, that's the problem. The problem is that these Jews, they're not Germans. You know, they don't belong in Europe. They have a land, and they need to get out of our continent and go to their place. So we're being hated for being a people without a land, and now that we have a land, now we're people that's hated for having land. Well, guess what? You know, we can take the hint. We understand what you mean.
Yeah, absolutely. You have, by the way, the Speaker of the Knesset, Amir Ohana, saying, if I were an American, I would take great pride in knowing that a wise, steadfast, and brilliant gentleman such as Mike Huckabee, the ambassador, represents my country. So the state of Israel, our officials here, praising Mike Huckabee and the work he did on the
Well,
cross.
there's a lot of people that have come out to Huckabee's defense, but at the same time, you know, Tucker Carlson has been taking his viewership along this journey for a long time, and so you do have. I didn't see how many people watched the interview, but let's assume at least hundreds of thousands, if not
Probably more.
the millions. You know, and many of them, I think, believe that everything that Tucker says is correct, and the reason why is because I think Tucker did have an important role to play. You know, while he was on Fox, when he was telling people about the misinformation that was being disseminated during the COVID and the whole COVID narrative. You know, he was the one that was exposing what was covered up in this Hunter Biden laptop. You know, he was the one who exposed the whole false narrative of the Black Lives Matter movement. I mean, he was very important. And so it's very disappointing to us when now he lumps in what Israel's been doing in this war with Gaza into that, because, you know, and if you would come around and you would spend the time here in Israel, you would see, you know, this is a people's army, that we were attacked. We didn't want this war. You know, some of what we talked about earlier, the hubris of October 6th, was because we didn't want a war. That's why we were willing to overlook everything that our enemies were saying that they were going to do to us. That's why we were willing to overlook the preparations that our enemies were making in order to attack us, because we hoped, not that we necessarily believed, but we sincerely hoped that they would never attack us, because we didn't want a war and we didn't want to do what we had to do. But then when we went inside Gaza, what did we find? We found that every building is booby-trapped. We found that the tunnels go under the entirety of the Gaza Strip, 500 kilometers worth of tunnels that come up into every house, that come up in bedrooms, under the cribs of the kids. Okay, that the weapons are hidden in the rooms of the kids, that almost every house has a copy of Mein Kampf in it. Okay, and when that's the case, you know, what can Israel do when the terrorists are hiding among the civilian population, when the terrorists are hiding in the hospitals, in the churches, in the mosques, in the schools? Okay, they set this whole stage up, this complete theater, so where they would hide among the civilian populations, that Israel would have no choice but to be shooting, and that you wouldn't even know who was a combatant and who was a civilian, and they could just, and they never distinguished, right? Hamas never distinguished the numbers between who's a combatant and who is a civilian, and they just say Israel killed, you know, 60, 70,000 people. And you know, you can't verify it, whether those numbers are true. We keep seeing the numbers, you know, slowly but steadily being decreased, and you can never know who's a combatant. And then also when you talk about the children again, which Tucker does, you know, we have seen, we've heard that Hamas and the Gaza Health Ministry calls everybody, including the age of 18, a child. So everybody up to the age of 19 is considered a child. And when you're putting rifles, machine guns into the hands of 18-year-olds, and they're shooting at IDF soldiers, and then you're calling them children that have been killed. I mean, you know, this whole thing is absurd. I mean, and again, I wish that I didn't have to watch this. I wish nobody had to watch this, but unfortunately,
I don't want to promote it, but
everybody's going to watch it.
everyone's going to watch it. The 2026 JNS International Policy Summit is coming up April 15th through the 17th at the Waldorf Astoria in Jerusalem. It's shaping up to be a phenomenal few days, and we'd love for you to join us. Visit jns-summit.org to register and take a look at the speaker lineup. It's a top-level group. Hope to meet you in Jerusalem this April. And Alex, We are still waiting for a potential U.S. strike on Iran. The Wall Street Journal of the weekend saying it could be a limited strike, perhaps to get the attention of the Iranian regime before a full-fledged strike. But here in Israel, it's just we are playing the waiting game, everyone anticipating when this strike could take place.
I think everybody is playing this waiting game, and it's a guessing game, and the media is also guessing. The Wall Street Journal reporting what they're reporting, that it could be a limited strike. You know, Axios making reports about when there could be a potential strike. What I would say is that none of these media outlets should be trusted with their reports at this time. There is just an incredible amount of guesswork and disinformation that's circling through mainstream media, and really none of us have a good idea of what is inside President Trump's head here. I think he does want to see some kind of negotiated settlement, but at the same time, I think that he is starting to come around to the feeling of the Israelis that there can be no negotiated settlement with the Iranians, that the Iranians are simply using the device of negotiations to postpone, stall, live another day, but that any negotiated settlement that will be reached by Iran is not worth the paper that it's printed on. Iran is simply looking to, use the negotiations as a tool to get what they want out of this. And certainly what they want is to survive. And what they also want very clearly, despite everything that they say in public, is to have a deliverable nuclear weapon.
Alex, here's the latest clip from President Trump. Take it away.
The people of Iran are a lot different than the leaders of Iran. And it's very, very sad situation. But 32,000 people were killed over a relatively short period of time. They were going to hang 800 2 weeks ago. Hang, some by crane. But no, I feel very badly for the people of Iran. They've lived in hell.
So there you have the president saying that he believes Iran has killed 32,000 people. The president making a clear distinction between the people of Iran and the regime.
Yeah, the people of Iran are tired of this regime. The people of Iran would rather see the money that the regime puts towards nuclear weapons, ballistic missiles, or to terror proxies like Hezbollah and Hamas and the Houthis be used instead to solve their water problems, their electricity problems, would be better used to pump into the economy, and then not have those sanctions leveled on it because they're developing illicit nuclear weapons. And that's the reason why the currency, the rial, is trading at something anywhere between 1.2 and 1.4 million to $1 single dollar in the U.S. So certainly the people of Iran have every reason to be fed up with the regime. That's why they've been out in the streets. And then you see the result, the reaction of the regime, which is to mow down protesters in the streets. And here you saying that Trump is saying that it was we see Trump saying that there was 32,000 people mowed down. And we also have to look back to earlier in this protest when it was just being reported that there was several hundred, maybe 1,000. And Trump said to the Iranian regime, don't shoot the protesters. We will have their backs. We are locked and loaded. Help is on the way. Well, locked and loaded, yes. Not only is it locked and loaded, it's locked and loaded more than anybody could even possibly imagine, with the USS Lincoln, the USS Ford now en route to the Middle East, a massive armada, as the president has called it, hundreds of flights of jets to the area, as well as refueling tankers, as well as transport planes, all coming to the region. And it's creating the situation where I don't even know if Trump has a way out of it at this point. At some point you move all the armada into place. As long as the Iranian regime is going to continue their belligerence, I don't see how at this point this situation is going to de-escalate.
So at the same time, Vice President Vance said that there was progress in the talks, indirect talks between the United States and Iran. But that being said, President Trump has his red lines. Let's check out this clip.
One thing about the negotiation I will say this morning is, in some ways it went well. They agreed to meet afterwards. But in other ways, it was very clear that the president has set some red lines that the Iranians are not yet willing to actually acknowledge and work through. So we're going to keep on working it. But of course, the president reserves the ability to say when he thinks that diplomacy has reached its natural end. We hope we don't get to that point. But if we do, that'll be the president's call.
So there you have the Vice President of the United States alluding to progress. But again, could this be a smokescreen? What exactly are we talking about?
He's saying that the president has red lines that the Iranians are not even willing yet to acknowledge. Okay,
right.
That means that Yes, they came to sit. Yes, in that sense, it is productive. Yes, the Iranians are going along with the charade and expressing a willingness to negotiate, potentially on the most important issue, which is the nuclear issue, which is an issue that they cannot be trusted on that issue alone. But even on the other issues that the president is saying red lines, and what are those red lines? It's the ballistic missiles, it's the funding of terror proxies, it's the mowing down of citizens in the streets. And here the Iranians are not even willing to acknowledge that those are red lines in the negotiations. So to me, this sends a strong signal that the negotiations are not going anywhere fast. And I think that it leaves Trump and Vance and others very frustrated. And at the same time, again, when you have that massive armada stationed where it's stationed, it costs billions of dollars just to move it there,
Right.
and to keep it stationed there. So I think that there might be another attempt at the negotiations, but the president now sending signals that it could be, a few weeks ago he was saying it could be about a month. Now we're hearing signals that he's saying, it could be 10 days to 15 days. I think that unless you see some kind of a dramatic change in the posture of the Islamic Republic, that we're moving very quickly towards some kind of a military strike. And then the question is, well, what does a military strike look like? The Wall Street Journal again reporting it could be a limited strike to get them to believe in negotiations. I don't think a limited strike is going to get them to believe in negotiation. I think a limited strike is going to signal the beginning of a war. And then the question is, who is the one active in that first strike? Is that the United States? Clearly, the United States could do the entirety of this all by themselves. But I think that the red lines that the president's talking about, some of these are Israeli red lines. The ballistic missiles are a red line for Israel. And because it is a red line for Israel, and I actually believe that the prime minister of Israel brought to the president when he went there to the White House just over a week ago, he took intelligence demonstrating that Iran is moving forward with their ballistic missile capabilities, with their nuclear program. And there's a lot of fears about what Iran could do, whether that is that they have some kind of deliverable nuclear weapon. Maybe they don't have a fully enriched nuclear weapon. They have some kind of a dirty bomb that they could assemble onto a ballistic missile. Maybe they have another way of delivering a nuclear missile or a dirty bomb, or they have some kind of chemical weapons that they could put on a ballistic missile. But I do believe that Netanyahu came to Trump with intelligence that we don't know about what that is, saying that there is a red line here, that there is a very limited timetable, and that Israel is going to strike in advance as a preemptive strike to make sure that Iran does not have the capacity to deliver whatever payload they're trying to deliver on Israel. And that's affecting Trump's calculations. And so it's good to hear that Trump is very open to what Netanyahu is saying, what Israel's saying, what those red lines are, what those deadlines are. Trump now saying it could be 10 days. Maybe it's 15 days, maybe it's 10 days. We don't know what it is, but buckle your seatbelts.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned the ballistic missiles, also the terror proxies, and of course, Israel has to deal with those terror proxies on a daily basis, whether it's Hamas down in Gaza or Hezbollah in the north. And I bring up Hezbollah because at least 10 people were killed in Israeli airstrikes in eastern Lebanon on Friday. The strikes were among the deadliest reported in recent weeks. So Israel's still dealing with whatever remains there are of Hezbollah in Lebanon.
Well, this isn't a still dealing with situation. This is a situation which Israel fully expects, and needs to prepare for the entirety of whatever Hezbollah has left in their capacity to attack Israel with, if some kind of a strike does get launched against Iran. Remember that Hezbollah was always the deterrent factor to prevent Israel from striking against Iran and its nuclear program. Hezbollah was stocked with 10,000 plus, missiles, long range, short range, rockets, pointed at Israel that could do significant damage to Israel. And because they're being shot from so close, it makes it much more difficult for Israel to shoot everything down. And so because Israel expects that Hezbollah will become very active, even though they weren't active during the 12-day war, they didn't fire a shot. But if this is going to be the end of the Iranian regime, the leadership in Iran, you can be certain, or at least you must be fully prepared, that Hezbollah is going to launch everything that they have at Israel. So what you're seeing now is an increase in Israeli preemptive action in southern Lebanon. Here it was in eastern Lebanon, to be taking out everything that they know exists, with, especially if it is regard to missile launchers and missiles that could be fired at Israel.
So, Alex, let's go to the Board of Peace, which held their inaugural meeting this past Thursday. We'll talk about Hamas and Gaza and the reason the Board of Peace came together. But the president did talk about Iran in his comments. You and I both watched the video as it was playing live. Let's check out President Trump's comments on Iran first.
We have to make a meaningful deal. Otherwise, bad things happen. So now we may have to take it a step further, or we may not. Maybe we're going to make a deal. You're going to be finding out over the next probably 10 days.
So there you have the president saying that if a deal isn't reached, bad things are going to happen for the Iranians.
Yeah, I think that that's the case. I mean, though, the whole Board of Peace meeting, it was a little bit surreal. I mean, the whole concept that there is a Board of Peace, and this is a very, very clear signal that the United Nations just is a failure as an organization, even though Trump said during his comments that he's been in touch with UN President, UN Secretary General Guterres, and that he's a good man, and that the UN is actually coming along and following his lead. You know,
But they haven't lived up to their potential, he said. Something
yeah,
like that.
yeah, sure, sure. You know, you see Trump going off script, you know, a lot,
Yeah.
talking about various leaders, telling different ones to stand up and how great everybody's doing, you know, saying that they effectively ended the war in Gaza, effectively ended the war in the Middle East. I mean, in Israel, we know that the war in the Middle East is not over, right? And even the prime minister last week was addressing the Conference of Presidents of major American Jewish organizations. And, you know, he basically said, we know we're fighting this war for over 2 years. It's the longest war in Israel's history. He didn't indicate that the war is over. And I think that you're seeing the IDF still active in Gaza, the IDF getting prepared to go back into Gaza in a major way, the IDF very active still in Lebanon, and clearly a major escalation on the cusp in Iran. I think perhaps Trump wanted to have this meeting ahead of any potential military action in Iran, and that's what happened. And now let's see if that Board of Peace will be all coming into line behind the President of the United States as he does gear up potentially to strike in Iran.
Alex, we also have a clip here of Special Envoy Steve Witkoff saying that President Trump is getting frustrated and that he thought by now the Iranians would come back to the table. Let's check out this clip.
I don't want to use the word frustrated. It's almost because he understands he's got plenty of alternatives. But it's curious. He's curious as to why they haven't, I don't want to use the word capitulated, but why they haven't capitulated. Why under this sort of pressure with the amount of sea power, naval power that we have over there, why they haven't come to us and said, we profess that we don't want a weapon, so here's what we're prepared to do, and yet it's hard to sort of get them to that place.
So, Alex, what do you make of this clip of Steve Witkoff saying that President Trump has had enough? He's getting frustrated. He thought that by now, seeing the Armada build up on the shores of Iran, he thought by now they would already, come running back to the table.
Well, I think this is Witkoff and Kushner, waking up to reality of who they're dealing with, the hubris that they thought that they could go in to begin with and to get a deal, unless, of course, that was an exercise, right? Perhaps going into negotiations with Iran was just an exercise to convince the American public that there was no other way because we tried negotiations first. Perhaps it was an exercise to demonstrate to the international community, like the Board of Peace and the United Nations and others, that Trump did try to reach a negotiated settlement first. But you have to understand who the Iranians are, and the idea that they're going to capitulate. Of course, they should capitulate. They should recognize that their heads are about to get blown off, and that if they want to live another day, that they should agree to whatever the president tells them to agree to. Obviously, they could have their own demands, say, okay, we'll agree to everything, release the sanctions. Or they could say, first things first, if you want to have a negotiation, why don't you just back that armada up a little bit, because it's hard for us to negotiate under this kind of a pressure. So yes, we're going to sign on the dotted line regarding the nuclear weapons. Why don't you back up your armada, and then we'll talk about the ballistic missiles and the proxies. And if you want us to stop the ballistic missile program, if you want us to stop the funding of proxies, we'll do that. Just release the sanctions. That would be the type of negotiation that you would expect. But that's not what we're hearing from the Iranians. What we're hearing is just more and more aggressive tone towards the United States, threatening. They put out a video last week, or at least we saw some kind of a video that's being credited to the Iranian regime. There was an AI generated video, of missile hitting an aircraft carrier. You heard that the supreme leader of Iran, the Ayatollah Khamenei, talked about the only thing that's more impressive than a aircraft carrier is the weapons that destroy an aircraft carrier, right? So we just keep hearing more and more aggressive tone from the Iranian regime. And again, what that means to me is that you have to understand their strategy here, which is that they're not going to back down. They need to demonstrate strength to their own people. But B, it's you have to wonder, and this is what I think all Israelis are worried about, is what tricks do they have up their sleeve? Again, do they have a dirty bomb? Do they have some kind of chemical weapon? Do they have a deliverable nuclear weapon? Even if they didn't manufacture it themselves, did they acquire that from Pakistan, from North Korea? Is there a weapon that they had from the collapse of the Soviet Union? So these are all things that Israel has to worry about, that the United States has to worry about in terms of retaliation. But no, it doesn't look like the Iranians are capitulating.
Yeah, absolutely. And Alex, I want to go back to the Board of Peace because the main reason that the meeting happened was to discuss Gaza. President Trump saying he believes Hamas will in fact lay down their weapons under his peace plan. Let's check out this video.
The war in Gaza is over. It's over. There are little flames. Hamas has been, I think they're going to give up their weapons, which is what they promised. If they don't, it'll be, they'll be harshly met, very harshly met. They don't want that. All this stuff like they don't mind dying. They told me that's not true. Everyone said, oh, they don't mind dying. No, they don't want to die. They said, we don't want to die. People don't want to die.
So the president says the war in Gaza is over. You and I, we're going to talk about it more in just a few minutes. We know the war in Gaza is not over. IDF troops are on the ground in Gaza, and the threat is still there, even though Israel controls about 53% of Gaza. Also interesting, Trump claiming that the Islamic terrorists told him, Hamas, saying that contrary to popular belief, they don't want to die. And I'm going to take the president to task on this one because the whole jihadist ideology of Hamas is martyrdom. That is what the kids are taught from an early age growing up, that the best part of life is dying for the sake of jihad. I think that the Hamas leaders, whether they're in the hotels still in Qatar, Turkey, wherever they are, I don't think they want to die because they're living a great life. But all their soldiers under them, I think, are willing to die in order to take as many Jews with them.
They're suicide bombers.
Yeah.
Right? Why haven't they rose up against Hamas the way the Iranian people are rising up against the Islamic Republic? Okay, because they have been indoctrinated since youth. Okay. This is the dichotomy in Gaza. You talk about the Gaza Strip, more than 50% of that population is under 18. Okay, they have come through the school system. They've come through the mosque. Their parents have indoctrinated them with this sense of martyrdom, okay, to be suicide bombers. You see the videos of the summer camps of these kids where they are staging plays like, when my kids go to summer camp or whatever, they do shows, it's about culture, it's about biblical heroes. These kids are taught summer camp where they are actually acting out October 7th like massacres,
right,
for years. So that's why they're willing to live in the tents. They don't care. They don't want to get out. They don't necessarily want a better life. The whole idea that you have the innocent Palestinian, the Gazans are innocent in the sense that the kids, they've been indoctrinated, right? So they haven't done this because they wanted to do this. They're themselves are held hostage. So yes, you can feel sorry for them, but you feel sorry for them because of what Hamas has done to them. So they're not going to just lay down their weapons. Now, what Trump is hoping is the same thing that you see Witkoff saying regarding Iran. He says, why don't they capitulate under all that pressure? So here they're taking a little bit of a different approach, okay, which is, on the one hand, Israel holds half the territory. Israel's threatening to go take out the remaining Hamas 50,000 guns, whatever it is. And what Trump is doing is he's waving carrots. He said that the United States is willing to put $10 billion into the board of peace. For all those other countries to sit on the board of peace, they have to give $1 billion
Right.
to the board of peace to sit there. So there's a lot of money, and nobody knows exactly what all that money is going to be used for. Is all that money going to go to the Gaza Strip? I don't know, but that's a significant carrot of at least multiple billions of dollars waiting to go in to Gaza if only Hamas will disarm and if Gaza Strip will be completely demilitarized. Now, part of the genius of what Trump is doing with the Board of Peace is who sits on the Board of Peace? Well, Qatar is there, Turkey's there, Egypt is there, Jordan is there. So the idea is that if all of them are part of the Board of Peace and Trump is recruiting this international stabilization force, that's enough pressure from Hamas's so-called friends to say, hey, the gig is up, let down your arms, okay? And Israel has put out this number, which is very important, that they put out 50 to 60,000 guns. That means that if they're going to disarm, Israel wants to see a pile of 50,000 guns,
Right.
okay? It's not an ambiguous number. We know how many weapons we're talking about. But the idea that they're going to lay them down, honestly, I think that they hope that the strategy is, you know what? Make my day. Come back in. We're already living in tents. We don't care. And what happens when Israel goes back in? The same strategy that there was before. The international community now up in arms once again about how Israel is killing innocent civilians inside the Gaza Strip. So this is the Hamas strategy. It's always been the Hamas strategy. And I think that Trump is potentially learning the hard way about who we're dealing with in the Middle East. And I think that Israel gets it. That's the important thing. Israel understands who Hamas is. Israel understands who the Iranians are. Israel has been proven right over and over again with regard to who the enemies are in the Middle East. And that is exactly why Israel cannot deal with the enemies the way Western countries want Israel to deal with it. Because quite frankly, we're not dealing with this threat from 3,000, 6,000 miles away. We are dealing with this threat which is in our backyard, in our living room almost. So Israel's got no choice. They have to know who our enemies are. Trump is learning the hard way, but I think that Trump is coming around very quickly.
So, Alex, that brings us to this international stabilization force, who they are, what they're going to be doing, what their mandate is. You had countries at the Board of Peace meeting pledging that they would send troops, including Morocco, Kosovo, Kazakhstan, Albania, and I want to talk about Indonesia, who said they would send 8,000 troops to Gaza. However, Indonesia was very clear. They will not fight Hamas. So we've talked about it before. When exactly will this force go into Gaza? We've also said many times that we can only rely on the brave men and women of the IDF really to keep us safe. And then you have Indonesia saying explicitly they're not going to be fighting Hamas. So what is their purpose? What are they going to be doing there? Are they going to be some sort of humanitarian aid army handing out food and water to the Gazans? I mean, what's the whole point of all this if they're really not going to be tasked with or willing to stabilize the situation?
Well, Trump did say in his remarks that there was a couple countries, he didn't mention who, that wanted to go in and fight Hamas. So we'd like to know who those countries are. But meanwhile, Indonesia is saying, like you said, that their 8,000 troops are not going to be in a combat situation and that it would be a humanitarian mandate. Now, when it says protecting civilians, so the question is, who's that protecting civilians against, right? And if you're not going to be in a combat mode, if Hamas is coming in, guns are blazing, trying to shoot down civilians that are collaborating either with the humanitarian force or with Israel, are those Indonesian troops going to shoot back? And what we've seen in the past, and we've talked about in our previous episodes, is you've had like international stabilization forces like UNIFIL, right?
Yeah.
Which was dispatched to southern Lebanon after the war between Israel and Lebanon in 2006. And what that force basically did was prevent Israel from operating in the area, right? Because the last thing that Israel wants to be accused of doing would be shooting Indonesian troops, right, in the middle of a firefight.
Sure.
Right? So it makes it much more difficult for Israel to actually operate in the area. So we don't know when this international stabilization force is going to be entered into Gaza. We don't know if Israel will end up taking out Hamas first. But I think the most important thing here is that you don't want to see anything more than the basic humanitarian aid, and that could be food and it could be tents, going into Gaza without the complete disarmament and demilitarization of Hamas and the Gaza Strip. And there's a lot of people in Israel saying, Hamas is still there. A lot of people in the international community saying Hamas is still there. A lot of this opposition to Netanyahu allowing the Hamas to stay in place, who's this being driven by? This is so interesting. You have the left-wing media is now blaming Netanyahu for leaving Hamas in place because Netanyahu said, total victory. So when he said total victory, he meant the complete disarmament of Hamas. So now the left is turning around and saying, well, you've left Hamas in place, so you failed, right? This is the same left that wants to give away Judea and Samaria to Hamas, all right? They want to see another state that would look just like Gaza in Judea and Samaria. These are the same people that were protesting just weeks ago out in the streets saying, end the war at all costs, in order to bring back the hostages, because bringing back the hostages and destroying Hamas are mutually exclusive, and you cannot do both. So we're telling you, leave Hamas in place. We don't care. Just get the hostages back, right? So what Netanyahu did was he froze the war to bring the hostages back. And now they're saying, well, okay, fine, you brought the hostages back, but you left Hamas in place, so you failed. Right? These are the ones that are willing to give away everything, give away the whole farm, all the Holy Land to Hamas. And now they're blaming Netanyahu for not getting rid of Hamas. But what Netanyahu is doing is clever. He's saying, hey, I needed to sign this deal in order to bring the hostages back. Now Hamas doesn't have their ace card. They don't have the hostages. At the same time, what Netanyahu wants is for Donald Trump to be focused on Iran. He said the head of the terror octopus is much more important right now than filing down the tentacle, which has already been severed, 75, 80% of its original capacity. So, he's willing to let this situation fester, and the situation is okay. Israel has taken 53% of the Gaza Strip. It's been holding that for months now, okay? And there's no indications that they're going to give it back until Hamas is completely disarmed and Gaza is completely demilitarized. Hamas doesn't pose an active threat to the Israeli home front right now, okay? They didn't necessarily have to pose that front on October 6th, but there was a lot of hubris in the Israeli military and intelligence which allowed that to happen. Israel could have prevented that attack, and we need to understand exactly what happened on October 6th and October 7th. We'll get to that later. But right now, if Hamas wants to keep pointing their guns at the citizens of Gaza, and they want the citizens of Gaza to fester in the ruins of the Gaza Strip, to live in tents, for eternity, what's the problem with that? Okay, there's a big carrot being waved, which is billions of dollars in rebuilding aid. If anybody saw the pictures that Jared Kushner was holding at Davos, Gaza could look completely modernized and different. But if Hamas doesn't want that, let them stew. What's the problem? So at a certain point, Israel's going to deal with, and the United States is going to deal with Iran. After that's done, you'll see whether Israel comes back to deal with Hamas, to de-arm and demilitarize, and only then will money start to pour in. And let's just hope that the International Stabilization Force doesn't get in the way.
Yeah, absolutely. And taking all those things into consideration, just practically speaking on a day-to-day basis, the war is still going on in Gaza. This past week, the IDF announcing that it dismantled a kilometer-long underground route, a terrorist tunnel, which they were using to hide in near Beit Hanun. That's in the north. So there's still, I don't know how many kilometers or miles of terrorist tunnels still there. And unfortunately, Staff Sergeant Ofri Yafi, 21 years old, from Moshav HaYogev, an Israeli soldier in the paratroopers reconnaissance unit, fell. It looks like a friendly fire incident. Unfortunately, very, very sad. So a soldier in Gaza fighting against Hamas terrorists, even if we're not on the offensive as we were when it was an active front of war, war is still happening in Gaza. Unfortunately, a soldier losing his life this week.
Yeah, demilitarizing Gaza also means the destruction of the entirety of the terror network. And, I think Israel believes that they've destroyed something about 150 kilometers worth of terror network, but the estimates are that it could be more than 500 kilometers worth of underground tunnels. So still a lot of work to be done, and perhaps that the International Stabilization Force will be active in trying to eliminate this this tunnel network, right? They said it's not non-combat mode, but still that they could be active in demilitarization and destroying those tunnels.
This is a good place to stop. But you know what, Alex, whether it's the Carlsons or the Candace Owens or the Hamas or the UNRWA or any of these others, the Jewish people and the state of Israel will prevail. I have no doubt about it. And this is a good place to end this week's Jerusalem Minute here on JNS TV. My name is Josh Hasten, correspondent for JNS News, alongside Alex Trayman, CEO of JNS. I want to give a shout out to the people behind the scenes, Aaron Wogelantern, Ryan Lifshitz, our producer Zach Sickerman, Esther Eden, and station manager Yuri Svretsky. Make sure you subscribe, make sure you like, make sure you give us a super thanks. Go to JNS TV for all this amazing content. Go to jns.org for all the latest breaking news from Israel, the Middle East, and the entire Jewish world. Be safe. Have a great week, everybody.